So welcome everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce our experts tonight. From the Semiahmoo Rotary Club, we have Doug Waymark. He's a financial planner with RBC, and he is our current treasurer, but he's had that role several times in the past. We have a couple of people that sort of hand the role back and forth. They do it for a couple of years and then give the person a break. So Doug does a great job for us. I'd like to introduce you to Doris Woodman-McMillan. She's with her company is Numbers Unlimited, and she's with the Abbotsford Rotary Club and is the current treasurer with the Abbotsford Club. And Terry Greer, CPA, and he is with the Passport Club. So welcome you three, and I pass it over to you.
Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm going to run through, we're going to sort of cover this off in 3 different segments. I'm going to cover sort of the record keeping and some of the fun stuff. And then Doris and Terry are going to provide their expertise around the reporting side. But Doris and Terry, I welcome you to jump in with any comments you have as I'm going through this. It's a short PowerPoint. We figure that you'll probably have more questions than we're going to be able to provide in terms of content, but we're going to cover off the basics. If you've been the treasurer for a while or before, you probably understand what it's all about. We'll hopefully give you some tips on how to do a few things, or we can answer any questions you have. If you're brand new to the treasurer, I'm not the first person that's going to say this to you, but you have my sympathies. Because it's a fair bit of work, but it's fun work if you like numbers. And as I said, I like numbers. So the first part we're going to cover off is record keeping, and really that's the big part of it. Unless you've got a staff for your Rotary Club, you're probably going to be doing a lot of the record keeping. Treasurers traditionally in an organization might be just the person that oversees the record keeping and make sure that the numbers are all properly done and reports back to the board. In this case, our treasurers are the ones that do the record keeping and then also report back to the board. So some of the key things about record keeping, my experience is, use the technology that we have, use an accounting software of some kind. It can be very helpful in doing a number of things. Just a couple of examples. We use Sage 50, which used to be simply accounting. It's a very robust program. Accountants work well with it because it works with their software programs. QuickBooks is another one. It's people that like it. You get used to a certain software. It's like anything. You get used to the software, so you're comfortable with it, and that's the important part. And as long as it can do get you the information that you're looking for, it doesn't have to be complex. You're basically recording revenues and expenses, and you're going to provide an income statement and a balance sheet both for your club as well as for the reporting you're required. Now, being in Canada, I'm used to the Canadian side in terms of the reporting requirements. We have 2 regulators that we report to, both the federal government, which is if you're a registered charity, you have to report from that perspective. If you're just a society, not a registered charity, you're reporting every year to the province of BC under the Societies Act, and you have to provide your financial statements along with that. But again, it doesn't have to be complex, but it has to be something you can easily get the information that you need and report back to your clubs. So providing proper financial statements, as I said, a balance sheet just gives you your list of assets and liabilities. Usually we don't have a lot of liabilities, but you'll have retained earnings. You may have some money that's been given that you it's donated for a specific cause, and you're not able to distribute it that year, so you have to roll it over as a payable for the next year. But it can be used for both reporting back to the members and the regulators. One thing I found, particularly, our club is a relatively good size. We have 63 members, fair bit of volume. We've got a lot of activities going on. Keeping up to date on your entries is important, because if you get behind, you say, "Oh, I'll do it next month" or whatever. If you try to do 3 months worth of stuff, for one, you're behind in terms of having the information to report back. If you're having monthly executive meetings and they're expecting a financial report, you need to have that information. And you don't want to, when I first started doing this, I was sort of doing that the couple days before the executive meeting, and I spent all night trying to get all the data in there. So I'm finding that if I can keep it up to date, on a regular basis, then it's not a rush at the end. I can make sure the information is accurate. Reconciling your bank accounts on a monthly basis, that's sort of a basic tenet of any of any record keeping. I joke that before when I graduated through high school and I had my own personal bank account, I balanced to the penny every day. Once I got married, I haven't balanced my bank account since. But it's reconciling, making sure that you know what's outstanding, that what's in the bank agrees with your records, and after accounting for checks that haven't been cashed and deposits maybe that haven't been made and those kind of things, because inevitably every month I find I'm missing something that I just forgot to record or whatever. So it keeps you on track and keeps you everything up to date. Well, a couple things just to do with gaming funds. If you're receiving any gaming funds for a specific thing, not all the clubs apply for it, but if you do, it has to be maintained in a separate bank account, and you have to report everything you do for the gaming to the gaming department in the province of BC, and making sure that you spend the money on what you said you're going to spend it on. And I haven't had that experience of dealing with that money at this point, but I think Doris, you have.
Yeah, we do that every year, and you must report the gaming funds in the format that they want, and you need to account for everything that went through the gaming account, and you need to use it for the what you applied for in the first place. If you applied for the food bank, for example, then you better pay the food bank. You don't use it for something else.
Yeah. So, and you don't want, because then they cut you off for the next year, or they reduce what they're going to give you the next year. I believe that. I've done a little bit of bookkeeping for an organization that gets gaming money, and they're quite particular. One thing I found very useful in Sage is using the project definition when you do a transaction. We're doing it this year. So if say for example, for gaming, I can identify any transaction that's gaming, and then I can track exactly what I put through for that. And it'll break it down rather than trying to sort through all my entries. And the same thing for global grants. If you apply for a global grant, they want the money kept in a separate bank account, and they want to be able to reconcile that bank account to everything you said you spent the money on. So it's very similar to gaming. They're quite particular about that. And you put in jeopardy, if you mess up on one global grant, you put in jeopardy your application the next time. Okay. So reporting, a couple things that you're going to report. So at the beginning of the year, you're going to prepare a budget, and usually that's going to come from a variety of sources. You're going to have your previous year's experience of what you spent in the different areas, both for the club expenses and for your fundraising activities, and what you've been giving out to different organizations. So each of your committees should present that budget, what they want to be able to spend. This year, it just it throws everybody in this whole COVID thing, and the fact that we're not able to hold our fundraising efforts. I know for our club, we had spent quite a bit of money on our different activities that we planned in our budget, and then come March, realized that our fundraising activities, which happen usually after we spent the money, aren't going to happen, and will be put off till next year. So luckily we had a reserve that we could draw from, and so we're just trying to stay on track with that, and rethinking our what we're going to spend next year. So we may have to curtail some of our regular support for whether it be scholarships or the food bank or whatever that might be. We're going to have to rethink those for next year. But we have a good track of where we spent our money, and so we're able to do that. So establishing goals for your revenue and expenses for each of the fundraising activities. Each committee for that fundraising, like we have a golf tournament, the golf committee should establish that, again, based on previous years, what they expect for this year and going forward. So it keeps them on track. And then providing the details and the revenue expenses for that activity after it's happened. So having them do a financial report back to the club, whether it be the committee chairs, but you can help with that because you're going to be tracking it overall. And then one thing that our club has defined for a number of years is to separate our club expenses. So things that we spend money on to fund club activities. So we have our regular meetings, the meal money comes in, and we spend the meal money out. We have our happy dollars, our different auction money, anything that comes in for the club. That's used to spend money for club activities. So for our badges, anything we have to spend just to run the club. We try not to use, and we're very, it's a sort of a tenet of our club is to not use any fundraising money on club expenses. And so again, by defining my projects, I can, anything that's to do with a club admin expense or revenue, I can identify each transaction for that and then make sure that we're on track for that. And for our club, we're even with not having a regular meetings and our fundraising, people have been giving through electronic funds transfer back to the club to maintain it. So we're going to be in the green or in the black for that. Another key thing is as far as record keeping, and that is keeping accurate records of your receivable donations. So you don't want to be going back through all your records and finding, okay, who gave me money as a donation? Because you're going to have to produce, if you're a registered charity in Canada, you're going to have to produce taxable receipts for them, and you want that to be accurate, because when you report to the CRA of your annual report, they're going to look to make sure that you haven't issued more donations than what you have taken in, because then you're going to be offside, and that's going to spell trouble. And the U.S., Terry will touch on the U.S. side of things and how the issues there. So collecting funds, when I say track revenue separately from expenses, sometimes money will come in and then they'll use some of that cash, say for example, to pay an expense. I don't like to do that. To me, you've got to keep everything separate. So everything goes into a revenue account and the expenses get paid separately, whether by check to back out to them. So I don't like to see people using the cash we've collected to pay an expense, like pay somebody back for something they've incurred. I'd rather have them submit an actual expense claim. Credit card and debit card, given that we're kind of isolated in our homes, we're not out there handing cash around everything. So that's been increased. We found, we've done a lot of credit card activity through our club. We use Bambora. They have a 2% discount. And, if you're for a particular fundraising, you got to factor that into your costs. It can add up. So you got to be careful. We're encouraging people to do, we don't do debit cards through Bambora. They only do credit cards, but you can use Square as another one where you can, it'll take both types of cards. It's a little bit higher cost. I believe their percentage discount on credit card is 2.75%. I'm not sure what they charge on the debit card for, it's usually a fee for each transaction, but it's very mobile. Yeah.
Can I interject? For our club, if we have a policy that if you use a credit card, that we charge an extra $1 for meals.
Oh yeah.
So that offsets the cost of the credit card processing, where debits are just a straight 10 or 15 cents per transaction, so that we don't worry about that the same.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So an example, when I was the White Rock Club uses the Square, and we were doing we had the White Rock polar bear swim, and we were selling T-shirts, and it worked out really well. People didn't have a lot of cash on them because they were coming down to go jump in the cold water in their bathing suits. So, but they had their debit cards, and it worked out really well. So it can work well for you, particularly if you're in a fundraising outside your major hall or anything like that. And then something our club has been doing since the lockdown was doing a lot of email transfers. So people can send you money. Usually, most of the banks don't charge. I notice when we send, we use a credit union, when we send money to pay for some of the bills I'm repaying people, they charge $1.50, but it's very convenient. I can easily send it to their email and it goes right into their bank account. So that's worked well during quarantine. Another thing that as a best practice, we found that having a check requisition form, so before anybody submits an expense, they fill out the form, they attach their receipts, and it usually requires the approval of the committee chair, whose budget it's a part of, or a club executive. So as a treasurer, I know it's been approved by somebody that's responsible for that budget, and they're not just giving me a receipt, say, can you repay me? I want to make sure that the committee chairs, not that they would submit something inappropriate, but that the committee chair is aware of the expense, and they can factor it in when they're doing the reporting of whatever activity they're doing. As I say, expense claims must be supported by receipts. Usually the receipt, not just the debit side of it. So some people use their debit card and just gives you a total. For one reason, the GST in Canada can be reimbursed 50% of it. So every dollar you pay in GST, you get back 50 cents semi-annually. So you want to know what that number is, and it doesn't show on just a debit card receipt. You want to see the actual receipt from the store. And then council checks are a good backup for giving to others. So if you've given a check to, written a check to another charity, then you want to track that, because we have to, if you're in a registered charity, you have to report all the charities other registered charities you've given money to, and you want to be able to track that using those council checks is a good way to verify that. So filings, I'll turn that over to Donna.
Okay, in Canada, at least in BC, we have to file an annual report because we're a society, and that has to be filed once a year. That includes everybody that is a current member of the board. So any directors should be listed on the annual report. You have a gaming report if you receive gaming funds. So I don't know, Terry, do you have the same sort of thing in the States?
Not so much.
Okay. In Canada, anybody that gambles, the money that is made from gambling goes into gaming, and gaming can be used by not-for-profits or charities. They issue you funds. You have to keep them in a separate bank account. You have to account for what you used it for, and you need to use it for what you said you wanted to. And you have to file a report that balances off, shows your financial statements for the year. That has to be filed with gaming, which is provincial. You also, if you have a charity, you have to file a T3010, which is the charity return. That has to be filed once a year within 6 months from the end of your fiscal year, if you're not running on a calendar year. And as part of that return, you have to list the officers and directors and the qualified donees. So those all are part of the charity return that you file. For us, we have a foundation that we file a charity return for. Its year end is December. Of course, the club's year end is June. So you have to show anyone who was a director in the 12 months of the calendar year. So your list can be quite long for the charity return for the directors. You have the option, if you have a charity, of having it line up with your fiscal year for Rotary Club, but it doesn't have to be. But those all have to be filed at least once a year. And Terry, you can take the US side.
I just have one comment. I'm treasurer of a Rotary Club that has US and Canada members. So probably the Canadian rules and the American rules both apply. So I guess the quick question I have to you, when I go to fill one of those forms out, can you help me?
Of course.
Thank you.
Of course I can.
It's a different language that the Canadian tax people speak, so you can interpret. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So I'm talking about the American side of reporting for Rotary clubs. And I thought I'd start with the state of Washington. So when a Rotary Club is formed and chartered, the club has to apply and register as a Washington State corporation. That gives a legal standing. The next step is every year, every nonprofit organization, every profit corporation has to file an annual return just to say, yeah, we're here. Here's a list of our directors and officers. And if that gets missed and it is not filed, your organization is dissolved. Could be a big deal, right? And a lot of times, for some reason, you get something from the state and the treasurer or the president doesn't recognize how important that piece of paper is. And then about 6 months later, they get a notice that last chance, file now or it's too late. And so a new treasurer, it's an easy thing to skip, easy thing to miss. It costs $10, so it's not really worth going there at all. And I believe I just read that they always send out a notice ahead of time, but I'm thinking that a lot of times mail gets lost or misplaced, and so you need to be on top of that. And Nancy Volkers is attending the meeting here. She's been a treasurer in the Stanwood Commando Club for many years. So if I'm misspeaking on anything, Nancy, let me know. Thank you. Then the other odd thing with Washington State, when you register as a nonprofit corporation in the state of Washington, that means you don't pay any income tax. Well, we don't have income tax anyway in the state level. And a lot of people think when you're tax-free, you can avoid paying sales tax. Not true. A Rotary Club or any kind of nonprofit organization for state purposes pays sales tax like anybody else. Indian tribes are a little bit different, but nonprofits get used to paying sales tax on pretty much everything you buy. Now with the IRS, I've got income over 50,000, income under 50,000. Every nonprofit organization in the United States is required to file a federal income tax return, informational return to the IRS. And it's either Form 990, Form 990-EZ, or Form 990-N. If your income is under 50,000, you file Form 990-N, and it's an e-file postcard. Takes, what, Nancy, 5 minutes to fill out and send in? If your income is over 50,000, it's a little more complicated. And if your income is over 100,000, it's super complicated. It's a multi-page form that covers pretty much all the activity that a club would have. So you wonder what the next one is, penalties. Penalties is my favorite category here. I've worked for 30 years working with nonprofits, and a lot of that work has been involving trying to abate penalties. So believe it or not, if your income is over 50,000 and you file a Form 990 or 990-EZ, the penalty for filing late is $10 per day, or if for a larger organization, $100 per day for filing late. There was a Rotary organization not too long ago that ended up filing late. Their penalty was $16,000. Had a new treasurer in the organization, didn't realize that that was a requirement, just skipped, didn't know that it was required at all. And so the club was expecting to pay $16,000. Fortunately, they got the penalty abated. Nowadays, they used to be, they had these big penalties just to get the attention of nonprofits. You need to file. If you don't file, you're going to lose a lot of money. They didn't really want the money. They just wanted organizations to file. So I'm thinking our country is a little more desperate for funds now. They look at these late filing penalties as a profit center. So I've noticed it's harder and harder and harder to get those penalties abated. You notice that, Nancy? Yeah. Used to be, oh, I'm sorry, we forgot. We had a new treasurer. He didn't know what he was doing. And, we're doing our best. And this is pretty much an automatic penalty abatement to avoid paying the penalty. Use that argument now, and they say, being ignorant of the law is no reason to not file on time. So a new treasurer or any treasurer needs to be aware of that this is a deadline, and there's a huge penalty if you don't file on time. So but those penalties only apply for the large organizations that have income under 50,000. Income under 50,000, the penalties, nothing, other than if you don't file at least every 3 years, you lose your nonprofit status. So when a Rotary Club is brought to life and it's incorporated, and it's chartered by Rotary International. Every Rotary Club that starts out like that is a 501c4, IRS code 501c4. Most of the Americans have heard of a 501c3. 501c4 is for service clubs and that type of organizations. With 501c4, there's no deduction for contributions, donations made to the Rotary Club. 501c3 there is. Okay, so the big penalty for all the 501s, except the small clubs, there's no monetary penalty. You just lose your ability to be a nonprofit organization with the IRS. And when you lose that, the club would probably want to reapply to be a nonprofit with the IRS. Right now, it's a $600 cost to do that, non-refundable. And you start from scratch, like you've never been around before at all. It's kind of weird system. Hate to report that. Due dates are on all these, the 15th day of the 5th month after your year end. So probably most of us have a year end of June 30th. That'd be their due date for the return for the 990, 990T would be November 15th. A lot of times, 5 months isn't, 4.5 months is enough time to get our paperwork together and be able to get this actually filed. And so if you file an extension form, send that to the IRS, they give you 6 months more time to file. If you don't get filed within that time, you're late and they'll assess you this big penalty. Like I said, this has been job security for me for many years, getting penalties waived by for nonprofits and Rotary clubs. Like I say, it's getting harder, so it's more important all the time to make sure that these get filed in time. Okay, we talked about the 501c4s. Rotary clubs, most Rotary clubs are 501c4. There's a few that are 501c3. 501c3 is way preferable because donations made by folks can get a tax receipt and potentially write that off on their tax return. A lot of clubs, because they're 501c4 and people donating to 501c4 cannot make that deduction on taxes, they end up forming a foundation. And probably a lot of people here have a foundation in their club. So if you have a foundation, it's going to be 501c3. People who donate can get a tax write-off. But to get that tax write-off, the club has to send a notice of substantiation that the donation was made in a certain year and nothing was received in exchange for that donation. I had a client on the tax side of things, and he donated $20,000 to a club, and they didn't give him a receipt. He gets audited. The IRS asks, "Where's your receipt?" And he says, "They don't have one." So he went to the club and says, "Could you write me a receipt? Do it retroactive, put last year's date on it," because he had a canceled check. He had proof that he'd paid it. Took that to the IRS and said, "No, it has to be a contemporaneous receipt. It has to have the receipt before you file." So it made everybody in the club really feel bad because he got probably about an $8,000 tax bill plus some penalties because the club was negligent and didn't give that person the receipt like he should have before he filed his tax return. So something for at least the American treasurers to remember that those receipts are important to send out, and they need to have a statement on each of the reports that nothing was received in exchange for that donation. If that statement's not on there, the IRS will disallow it also. So like I say, a lot of clubs, they're 501c4 for the club, 501c3 for their foundation. And foundations are important to have if you do have some major contributions coming in and people would like a tax deduction. That's all I have to say. I'm sure there'll be many questions, but thank you very much for this opportunity.
There was one thing that I didn't mention. As a not-for-profit society in BC, there is no filing that we have to do for financial filing. We do have to file the annual report. But other than that, we don't have to file a tax return per se because we're not taxable and there's no requirement for that. And that's all I have.
So everyone, I'm just going to jump in for a second. There are a couple of questions here pertinent to what you were just talking about, Terry. So if it's all right with everyone, maybe we'll go to those now and then we can continue on after that. So first up is Rod Thompson. He's joined us. He has a question, and on deck is Rihanna Sadhu. So Rod, you're up. Please unmute your mic and video and ask your question.
Thank you, Alan. So the question is for Terry. And Terry, I heard you speaking about if your income is over 50 or under 50. Is this actually a U.S. corporate tax filing then? Is that what you're talking about for U.S. clubs?
It's a corporate nonprofit informational return. And the 50,000 figure, that's another good point. 50,000 is your gross receipts. So if you have a fundraiser and you take in 55,000 in total gross receipts, but it costs you 50,000 to generate that income, you're over the 50. And so you're required to go to the 990 EZ.
And so then the second part of that question is the 50,000 cumulative for the year, or is it per event? Because it sounds to me
Cumulative
like,
for the year.
right.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Not excluding all expenses. So it's gross income.
Thank you, Rod. Rihanna, you're up next.
Hi, Terry. Thank you for all that hard work you put into that. And actually, about 1 minute after I had asked what the deadlines were, you circled back and explained what the deadlines were. So you've already answered my question. Thanks.
Oh, thank you.
Awesome. So I guess where are we in the terms of your presentation? Have you got some more things to cover?
No, I think that we were going to leave the last 20 minutes for questions. If there's anybody has any.
Okay. So the next question in the queue then would be from Bev Harrington. So Bev, if you can unmute your mic and ask your question.
My question was, I've not heard about email transfers to a club's email address. Can you talk more about that?
Sure. So what we did was we set up an email, semialmorotary.treasure@gmail.com is because our club has an email address with Gmail. And you go to your bank and on your online banking, you can identify, I want to send an email transfer or internet from credit union. It's an interact email transfer, and you send it to the email. You can either have it with a security question, so you can say, okay, you know, what I've done was I've sent when I've sent out things, I said, okay, what is our district number? And the answer obviously is 5050, and they can process it. When I get them, I have it set up with my bank that they'll go directly into the account. So when people send money to rotary.treasure@gmail.com, and if anybody wants to send money to us, they can remember that email address. It'll automatically go into our bank account with Coast Capital Savings. And so then I get a note, it sends me an email saying that so-and-so has deposited. And I print off that note just so that I've got it for my record keeping, and I can post it into my accounting system.
And is there a charge for that?
I say when I send something from my bank, obviously I deal with RBC, they don't charge for it. It's free of charge. I think most of the banks don't charge. Coast Capital, when I send money out for, if I'm paying somebody for reimbursing their expenses, they charge us $1.50. And we've sort of accepted that as being, normally we don't pay a lot of service charges to Coast Capital anyway. It's sort of like a flat fee per month, minimal charge. So in fact, we're as a nonprofit, we're free, but we absorb that $1.50 and say that's part of the doing business during this time. I'm going to see it as being limited. But.
It usually doesn't cost you anything to receive it. It sometimes costs you something to send it.
That's right.
There's a difference.
I've never heard of such a thing. That could be Canadian specific. It's a great idea. As our treasurer, I just sent out invoices for dues, and I've had several people say, "How about if I just email you money?" What? Great. How do you do that? I don't think we have that option here.
Yeah,
I could
Terry,
be wrong.
it's just a Canadian thing. It's not available in the U.S. at all. So it is the very progressive Canadian banking system. So
Gotta love Canada.
Interac is specific to Canada, and as Jason points out, it is a financing piece or a finance transfer arbitrage for Canadian financial institutions.
But I think, with this, we talk about the new normal, but I think everybody's going to have to adapt to this idea of not everybody being able to be in person with somebody and write a check. That technology is going to step up. I know the organization I work for, where all our meetings are done by, we use WebEx, not Zoom, but everything's done by video now, and they're not in a rush to get us back in the office.
I've had a few of our club members that have said they have no checks. They have to go to a bank and get a cashier's check and mail it to me.
Yeah.
It's so primitive using checks anymore.
And we do accept dues by credit card. But again, there's a 2% cost. You may want to charge a higher due, 2% more, or, like Doris said, $1 more or $2 more, whatever that might be.
Yeah, we sell lunch cards. So if they're $210 for 10 lunches. If they buy it with the credit card, we charge $10 more. And so it's like $1 per 20 roughly. And if they want to pay their dues with credit cards, we upcharge it by $15 or something. We usually set an amount so that covers the credit card fees.
Terry, another option might be we use PayPal for some of our events, and we've registered as a charity, but I believe not-for-profits, they also provide a discount. So I believe PayPal is cheaper than using a credit card. That might be an option if this pandemic goes on for a while, or also Bambora through the Rotary might be able to utilize that a little bit more. Until you guys get e-transfers.
Yeah, thank you.
Alan, any other questions?
We have no more questions at the moment, but we have a few minutes left. So if anyone else has anything burning that they would like answered, please get them in there. And not seeing any, Doug, then maybe back to you. And
yeah, I just want a couple of comments on the filing. One thing that our club has done, we've engaged the services of a CPA to actually do our T3010 the last couple of years. Charge a little bit of money, but then we're comfortable that it's somebody else is overseeing our books other than just internally. That was a concern that, as a treasurer, people put a lot of trust in you, and I appreciate that, but at the same time, I don't like to think, I want to make sure that that everybody's comfortable, has a comfort level that we're doing the right thing. So it's good to have a second set of eyes that maybe not associated with the club to do it. And the challenge is being treasurer, as I mentioned, if it's for the first time, make sure you have an exit strategy. So train somebody to, that can maybe be, we've had two members of our club, myself and another fellow, that have done it for a number of years and we're very comfortable. So when he was going to be sort of semi-retiring and spending some time on the island in his new home, I said, look, I'm happy to take it over. But they've talked about having one of our younger members to step in as being sort of the apprentice. He has a financial background. He works in the financial services industry. And the idea would be that we'd have another person to step in, because I've been the treasurer of my church. And as I said, I was elected treasurer for life. The church had to collapse before I was relieved of my duties. So not that it was because of my my treasurer's efforts, but that we collapsed. It just was a matter of size and everything.
And there was a comment that I made earlier this year, because up until the July of this Rotary year, I had a co-treasurer, and that person did some of the legwork, and I did the bookwork and did the reporting. And that worked really well. And then he just stepped back, which was fine. But I had another hat on this year in addition to being the treasurer. And the comment that I made to somebody was that there's two jobs that you can't do at the same time in Rotary. And they said, what's that? And I said, treasurer and anything else. So if you're going to be the treasurer, you have every right to say no to the other things that your club members are going to ask you to do, because it's a lot of work and it's a lot of responsibility. And people don't realize how intricate it can be when you're only a little club, but you have a service project over here, and then you have gaming funds over here, and then you have an international project that you're going to work on, and then you have your operating expenses, and you need to report that correctly so that the club understands where they're at. But that's not simple. And when you are processing the money that was taken at the counter when people came for your meeting, and there's tickets to this, and there's lunch cards, and there's dues that they paid, and there's all these different things. You could have a deposit of $1,000 or $500, and it might take you 20 minutes or half an hour to figure out what that represents. So you don't want to do anything else if you are the treasurer. And I give you permission to say no to anything else.
Yeah. That's something that we've done is our sergeant at arms, when they report all the money that comes in at the door, so whether it be for meals and all that, they break it down on a sheet, exactly what the money is for. So I know when I get it, that it's all broken down for me. They've tracked it, and they balanced their float to that and that type of thing. The other thing I was going to mention about tax receipts for the Canadian clubs, and Doris and I talked about this, people may want to give you something in kind and get a tax receipt for it. Make sure you read the rules regarding, and I won't go into all the detail, but CRA has a very good website in terms of what are the rules for issuing tax receipts. For things like services, so if somebody wants to donate the use of a condo for an auction or something like that, that's not receivable. That's considered a service. If somebody wants to donate their services to be a plumber and free plumbing, they cannot do that. They cannot donate that. It's a service. So it's only a goods that can be donated in kind. And the challenge is sometimes getting the fair market value. What is that worth? You know, if they've just bought it brand new and they've got a receipt for it, fine, but why not just give you the money? So I usually encourage people, just give me the cash, because it's much easier. Or if they, you know, if they're being reimbursed for an expense, they'll say, oh, just give me a receipt for that. I said, no, I will give you a check for the amount. And if you want to write a check back to Rotary, make a separate cash donation back to Rotary. And then it's very clear. I know I can, there's a good paper record for it. So those are the kind of things that I've always been a stickler on, and it makes the job a little bit easier because you're not trying to finagle things and you're not worried about an audit coming in. Fortunately, I've never been audited by CRA, but I wouldn't want to be.
Doug, if I may.
So Doug and Doris, do your clubs have a committee that reviews your work once a year? Just to go through and make sure that things are how they appear? Internal audit?
Go ahead, Doris.
We don't. They're just glad that someone has done it. The only check and balance is on the foundation, that we have a foundation, so we have to file that with Revenue Canada. But no, we don't have an internal. That actually might be a good practice that we could instigate, because it would give another set of eyes a look.
Yeah, and that's where I mentioned that we've engaged the services of an accounting firm to do our charity return. But the idea is that they get a complete a look at our books. I don't know that they do an audit or anything, because they're charging us a minimal amount to do it. But I think, you know, it's probably not a bad idea, as long as the people that are doing it are comfortable looking at that data. If you had people that were very dedicated but didn't have a financial background, they might, you know, really not see what they're, or I might be more challenging, but it's a good idea.
Doug, if I can interrupt just for a sec. Rod, you had a comment, and then we do have a couple more questions coming in now. So go ahead, Rod.
Thanks very much, Alan. Doug, I just wanted to support, you were talking about using Sage, and you know, there's Sage, there's QuickBooks, there's other programs of that nature, but I would just encourage people to use some commonly accessible commercial product, and to have that so that if something happens to you, if you're out of the country and something happens to you, or as the case with our church, when our treasurer literally dropped dead when he was on vacation, and we had nothing, it was all on spreadsheets on his computer, and we had to go back and pull it out. There was no malfeasance involved, but it was just nobody knew. It was all stuff that he had done in a proprietary way, and nobody had any way of doing it other than just unraveling the whole thing. And it took a tremendous amount of work to make sure that the charity returns were all done correctly in that particular year. So have it in a way that it can be handed off to someone else if need be.
Yeah, and I would confer. That's why I like to say, I know Sage 50 works well. Doris, you can probably agree. You know, I can send the file, the backup file, to an accountant, and they can put it right into their accounting program.
Yeah, Sage 50 has the ability to run projects as well, so you can have your gaming and your service projects and your operating, and you can run them all in one set of books, but you're able to report to the board or to the club really clearly what belongs where. And it's all in one program.
Treasurers do not want a lifetime job. If they have a good software program, they can hand it off easily.
Yeah.
They've got a way out. This could be the exit plan.
So Jason, App, you had a comment that you wanted to make, and then Bev, you had a couple of questions, so you're up on deck. So Jason, you're up.
Yeah, this is just further to the discussion about getting the work inspected by someone else, and I know it was referenced about going through the data, you know, annually. I'm just wondering if clubs typically have a best practice or a routine of having even their bank statements reconciled to actually what's being presented in the financial reports. I share this because I'm coming off of taking over as treasurer for a different local charity where there was years of just financial reports and everything looked fine until we actually got a bank statement from the bank, and for the first time in years had one that wasn't forged, and one that suddenly the $40,000 that we thought was in this charity was 19 cents, and so it was a reputable, trusted treasurer, but it was never questioned. And so we put in a routine. We changed the bylaws right away that every month, and when I do my treasurer's report, which is a financial report using QuickBooks, it's the bank statement is actually printed. It's actually downloaded from the bank site by the president, who initialed. This isn't a Rotary; it was a different organization who initials. So we have a permanent record in the file of two initials, the president and myself as treasurer on the bank statement. So just wondering if others have incorporated something like that. It's a simple routine. Basically, all they're looking at is just having a quick glance at the ins and outs. Primarily, the bank the bank balance at the end of the month is the number one thing that they're double checking, because that's an easy thing to look at the financial report to the bank statement. Yes, it makes sense or close to it if your dates are a little bit off. But wondering if others have that similar routine, or Doris or Doug, if you have any recommendations for we found it to be an easy one that was quite easy to replicate, and both myself and the president both have equal access to online banking, which was very important. So
let me handle that one. In my accounting career, I did dozens of internal control audits. With every nonprofit, there's one thing that came up with every single one. That's the best practice. The treasurer normally does everything. Control of the bank statements, reconciles the bank, writes checks, collects deposits, it does everything. If somebody different from the treasurer every month does, like you're suggesting, looks at the bank statement, and actually I would require look at every single check, front and back. If you do that, 99.9% of the fraud would go away. Like I say, have somebody initial it that shows they've actually done it. If you do that every month, it's brilliant. And it's not that hard. Sometimes people take that job and they get kind of lazy and they say they've done it and they haven't. So you need to have documentation that they've actually looked at those documents. If you do that, the likelihood of defalcation is almost zero.
No, that sounds like good governance. And to be honest, our club, I submit a bank reconciliation statement to the club executive, but I don't actually provide the bank statement. So I'm going to start doing that now, Jason. So thank you for bringing that up.
And
No, that's great.
ditto, I provide the bank reconciliation that shows what's outstanding. We all have the ability to log on and look at the bank account at any point in time. None of us can transfer anything. So we all have, it's 2 signers for any transaction that we want to do. But that's a good point, Jason. I do provide the bank rec, but I don't provide the bank statement. So that would be a good thing to do.
Great. Bev Harrington, you had a couple of things, and George Cotton, you'll be up on deck. So Bev.
You're muted, Bev.
There you go.
Normally I can just press the space bar and it will unmute me, but I guess not today. So I was glad to hear about the security controls coming from being a credit union CEO. We had lots of security controls and they're just non-existent. We have lots and lots of money in our accounts and I handle everything. So I'm wanting to put those in place. But my question is, does anyone else handle the reconciliations for fundraisings like the auction, or are you responsible for verifying all of the income and expenses that evening, all the things that happen? Your foundation chair, do they submit the reports and all to the foundation, to TRF, or are you doing all of it? I'm wanting to delegate some things and find out what other people do.
We don't have any, I don't do anything with respect to Rotary Foundation funds. That's all handled by the Rotary, the foundation chair for our club. I do handle the transactions for the Abbotsford Rotary Foundation, because if people are donating through the club, then it comes to me. It's a combination for any fundraisers that we do. The fundraising team will have a report, but ultimately it's what goes into the bank that it determines how much we made and how much the expenses were. So it's a combination of both. They provide a breakdown of what they took in, what they believe they took in, and what they believe they spent. And then I verify it when I do the actual bookkeeping for the month.
Did that answer your comment question, Bev?
Well, actually, it takes about 2 days to reconcile our auction, and it's all me. Because all the different input, verifying to all of the input sheets for all the different pieces, silent auction, live auction, various things that happen within the auction, and then making sure everyone's been properly invoiced, and then collecting the funds that don't get sent in. So it's a tremendous lot of work, and it seems like there ought to be others involved.
Well, I think that, yeah, I mean, give you an example. We've you're probably aware that White Rock Pier got wrecked in a storm, and our club stood up and jumped in and helped with raising money for it. And we've been selling planks to the pier. So there's a fair bit of volume prior to the, last year, like before this year, but mostly last year, from the time from middle of the year to the end. And one of our club members, the previous treasurer, he was managing it. He carried on managing it for me. So he's tracking the tax receipts. He's tracking. I get every entry and I have to input it into the bookkeeping system, but I'm leaving him to be responsible for, following up with the bills and tracking the receipts and that kind of thing. And he'll report that back to me, and then I'll submit it when we do our final charity return through our accountant. But I think that, that for something that's like our golf tournament, you need to have some help, although it all does end up with the treasurer at the end of the day, because you're the one that's probably going to deposit it into the bank account. And if other people are handling it, you want them to be pretty accurate in terms of what they're doing, because if somebody's made a deposit and they come in and give you a bunch of sheets of paper and you're trying to go, okay, what is this, you know, what is this, I can't make any sense of it. It makes it difficult when you got to combine it with everything else. So you know, if somebody's going to take it on, you want to make sure that they're doing it the way you want them to do it.
And Bev, if you're going to receive money that has to go into the bank, that should be coming, like your fundraising team should be putting together the information to explain what those funds are. It shouldn't all fall on you. You should, if you're the treasurer, you're going to have to record it, but you didn't run the auction all by yourself. So the people who are running the auction should be compiling the information for you so that you just have to record it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
What you're really talking about there is managing the risk. You know, you're devolving the responsibility for collecting those funds. You're also devolving risk, and so your club has to be confident that the risks that are taken by devolving the collection of funds are worth taking. And so again, the trust factor has to go a little further downstream, but it all does then flow back to the treasurer. And Doris, I just want to clarify, when you said you don't deal with Rotary Foundation monies, I just want to clarify that's money being collected that's donated to the Rotary Foundation. You would provide accounting oversight to a grant that was running through the Rotary Foundation, correct?
If we're putting money into something, yes.
Yeah.
Because then we would have to send the money. But what I'm talking about is it became a tradition about 1.5 years ago, maybe 2 years ago in our club, that on your birthday, you write a check to the Rotary Foundation for the amount of your year of birth or how old you are, which can get kind of costly. But we write checks, and quite often they're written to the Rotary Foundation. They're not written to the Abbotsford Foundation. If they're written to the Abbotsford Foundation, it's for polio. So then I deposit the check and I turn around and write a check to the Rotary Foundation for the amount that we're giving to polio. But anything that goes to the Rotary Foundation, I just hand off to Ron Kelly. He's the foundation chair and he takes care of it for me. I don't even know what he does with it, to be honest. He gets it to Rotary.
And I think the foundation chair is able to track what's been given on behalf of your club.
Right.
I know ours does.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a monthly report. And that also goes to your club president.
So guys, we're a few minutes past 8 o'clock. I think we've had most people's questions covered. George was up next, but the discussion was so good that he had his question answered. So Doug and Doris and Terry, I throw it back to you to wrap up, and there we go.
Well, I just want to say congratulations on being a treasurer. And but they say it's, you gotta like numbers, but it's a rewarding job, because they say it's a bit of work, but you know you're contributing to a good cause. So and you learn something all the time. Like I've learned tonight that we need to maybe step up our governance around the bank statement side of things, which is a good thing.
And thank you all for taking the time to be here. When I laughed when Alan said that the experts were going to talk, because I don't consider myself an expert, but if there's anything that we can help you with, please don't hesitate to ask, because if there's something that I can do to make your life a little bit easier as treasurer, I'm more than happy to do so.
Super.
And our
I have to say the same thing. Thank you for the chance to meet with you all. And Doris will be talking to you about Canadian issues. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
The same thing, if people have questions or issues for me, my email's right there. So
Yep.
Feel free to contact me.
Okay. Well, thank you, Alan, for moderating.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
Zero.
To
Bye-bye.